Now, as mentioned, a resident at a Vancouver seniors home has tested positive for COVID-19, and that means 3 seniors homes in the Lower Mainland are now trying to work and stop that disease from spreading. As CTV's Michelle Bernard reports, some families of seniors in care don't think enough is being done to support the people who are most vulnerable.
81-year-old Bill Shillard loves to dance, but there is no more dancing inside the Lynn Valley Care Centre, where 6 seniors have died from COVID-19.
It's really hard. It's really hard on all of us.
Shillard's daughter is worried, not just for her dad, but all the residents. She says in the midst of this crisis, they are not receiving adequate care.
They are not meeting the needs of the people in there, and the public needs to know that. These are vulnerable people, and they need help.
Kelly Shillard says her sister and family members of other residents are helping as much as they can, but the facility desperately needs more staff because frail seniors are suffering.
Pull-ups not being changed, people not being turned who are bedridden, people whose urine bags are not being emptied throughout the night.
A statement from Vancouver Coastal Health says in part that Lynn Valley Care Centre is operating very near target staffing levels, and we are working with the operator to add additional staff as needed. BC's Chief Medical Health Officer calls the situation at Lynn Valley, where more than a dozen staff members have fallen ill, concerning.
They are doing everything they can, and I really support the staff that are in there. The challenge is always balancing some of the ways that we can keep residents separate and prevent transmission, which causes further isolation and challenges in providing that care.
Meanwhile, Vancouver Coastal Health confirming that another seniors home, one in Vancouver, has a confirmed case of COVID-19. That case is at Harrow Park Centre in Vancouver, where the resident is in isolation and receiving care. The infected senior lives on a restricted access floor and did not interact with the general population of the facility. Back at Lynn Valley, Kelly Shillard says more than a dozen people are being tested for COVID-19. And now her father, who has begun to show symptoms, is being tested too. Michelle Bernard, CTV News, North Vancouver.
The pandemic is now raging in multiple BC nursing homes, the apparent deadly consequence of contagious nursing staff being allowed to work in multiple facilities in the early days of this outbreak. CTV's Michelle Bernard reports on grieving families looking for answers.
She was a firecracker. She really was.
Her name was Sandra Cairns, a registered nurse in her younger years, a mom, grandmother, great-grandmother.
No, I'll just miss her whole demeanor, the fact that she was just so feisty and strong-willed.
80-year-old Cairns moved into the Lynn Valley Care Centre about 5 years ago. Last week, her family learned she was sick like so many others in the home, infected with COVID-19.
Can't take them out of isolation because of the outbreak, and you can't come in and see them because of the outbreak.
Just a few days later, she would die, another victim of the virus that is claiming lives worldwide.
They told us we could come and say goodbye, but there was no way that Sandy would have even wanted us to do that, to jeopardize our family. We just couldn't do that.
And now the family can't even gather together to celebrate her life.
It's like there's no closure.
42 residents and 21 staff from the Lynn Valley Care Home have tested positive for COVID-19. 10 seniors from there have died.
This is really real, and it's scary.
There is gratitude for the hardworking staff at the center, but still there are questions.
Could we have prevented our mother from dying? I don't know.
The answers may come later. For now, the family is warning others.
We're not all invincible, and we don't know enough about this virus.
And remembering the mom that they lost. Michelle Bernard, CTV News, Maple Ridge.
After 20 deaths, the COVID-19 outbreak at Lynn Valley Care Centre in North Vancouver ended in May. But what happened during those early days haunts a group of women who say they were on the inside and saw it all unfold. CTV's Michelle Bernard has the troubling details on what they describe as a heartbreaking lack of care for vulnerable seniors. When COVID-19 crept into the second floor of the lodge at Lynn Valley Care Centre, these 6 women with elderly family inside say they found themselves thrust into what to them became mission impossible.
The moral distress for all of us at seeing what needed being done and was not being done was devastating and very traumatizing, actually.
The women who were still allowed inside in the early days back in March say the scene was one of chaos and despair. Help! Help! Althea Gibb-Carsley took this video inside Lynn Valley. At first, she expected the staff would help the senior who was crying out. No one came.
I waited for a while, probably, it's too long, but 10 minutes. And then I went and I helped her. This is a woman whose legs were caught in the rail of her bed and she was wet and dirty.
Help! The women say they tried but simply could not help everyone.
They were crying out for help incessantly for a long time, up to an hour, hour and a half.
At some point we weren't allowed to go into the other rooms. Help! I need help, and it would go on for half an hour.
With workers at Lynn Valley becoming infected or just too afraid to go to work, the women say at times they only saw 2 or 3 staff members for roughly 45 lodge residents.
She never complained.
May McHale remembers the day she went to see her mum Isabel and found her soaked in her own urine.
Her pad was not changed probably for at least 12 hours. It was bursting at the seams. She was shivering in bed and cold, and her trays, her meals were just sitting right beside her and she couldn't get them. That was the point I knew that my mother was not going to survive.
Her mum died of COVID-19 March 18th, the 8th of 20 seniors who would lose their lives to the virus before the outbreak was finally contained. We reached out to Lynn Valley Care Centre for an interview. We received a written response instead. It reads in part that the moment we were made aware of the outbreak, we did everything possible to stop the spread and providing care for our residents. Professional replacement staff was brought in as soon as possible, following a short time when we had some staff shortages. These women say what happened in Lynn Valley needs to be investigated. They're calling for accountability to make sure BC's most vulnerable citizens get the care they deserve. Michelle Murrow, CTV News, North Vancouver.
Elderly residents left hungry, medications not properly administered on time, and inadequate cleaning. Tomorrow on CTV News, these women describe what they claim is a discrepancy between what was happening inside the centre and what the public was told. The day after CTV News revealed shocking video and photos from a North Vancouver care home in the early days of the pandemic, there are calls for a full inquiry. But so far, Premier John Horgan says it's not necessary. CTV's Michelle Bernaro continues our investigation tonight into what many grieving families say is a system-wide failure to protect BC seniors.
6 women bonded by the tragedy COVID-19 inflicted on Lynn Valley Care Centre all spent time in the home in March as the virus spread.
It's really important to look at what we learned and how we can do better.
The women say they saw and heard things that still disturb them.
It concerns me, it concerns us that to hear our Premier saying we don't need an inquiry, we're not the same as Ontario and Quebec. I think it's perhaps arrogant. I think it's perhaps naive.
Althea Gibb-Carsley, whose mother-in-law died of COVID-19, says some of the same circumstances reflected in reports into long-term care in Eastern Canada were also happening in Lynn Valley.
Like care needs not being met, like people asking for help and not getting it, like diapers needing changing and not being changed in a timely way, like cleaning not being adequate, like medications not being on time.
The 6 women are having a hard time understanding what they say are blatant discrepancies between what the public was told and what they witnessed inside Lynn Valley Care Centre.
That there was adequate staffing, that the high touch point cleaning was happening, that meals were being provided. We were assured consistently that the resources were in place. That was not so.
Althea took this video inside the care home and helped this distressed senior. But all these women agree vulnerable seniors were not getting the care they needed.
Somebody with COVID was wandering into the room of someone without COVID, and vice versa.
The residents were eating together initially because there weren't enough staff to feed in the rooms. So even though it was communicated to the general public that the residents were all in their room, that didn't happen for about a week.
And when residents were finally confined to rooms, families say there was insufficient staff to help seniors who couldn't feed themselves.
There were a lot of people that weren't getting their food, and I actually heard people say, "I'm hungry."
Lynn Valley Care Centre is refusing CTV's requests for an interview. In a written response, they say in part, professional replacement staff was brought in as soon as possible following a short time when we had some staff shortages. Residents with dementia always require a higher level of care. We took steps to handle these residents with extra care and caution, which was particularly enforced when professional replacement staff was brought in.
We need to do something about this. We can't forget them.
These women maintain there is a crisis in long-term care homes in our province, and the government needs to fix it. Michelle Bernoro, CTV News, North Vancouver.
To a CTV News exclusive now. When the COVID-19 pandemic began, a resident of Lynn Valley Care Centre in North Vancouver became Canada's first COVID-19 fatality. Eventually, 20 seniors died in that facility.
Tonight, CTV's Michelle Bernoro investigates allegations being made by a care aide who works inside that care home, who alleges that people became sick because of mismanagement and secrecy.
Lynn Valley Care Centre experienced one of the deadliest COVID-19 outbreaks in long-term care in the province. And as the virus spread, care aides like this one were filled with fear.
It seems like you said there's a war zone because you don't know who is your enemy.
We are protecting this worker's identity over worries she could lose her job for speaking out. She says when the first employee at Lynn Valley tested positive for COVID-19, she and others heard about it from colleagues. She alleges management waited 3 days to inform staff.
It's not directly from the management. We know only that our co-worker that there is a COVID there.
In a written response, Lynn Valley Care Centre says all safety measures and protocols on the staff member testing positive, including tracing and contacting all staff and residents that were in contact with the staff member, were conducted by the management team under the supervision and instructions of the public health officer. This worker also alleges that in at least one instance, a care aide bathed a COVID-positive patient, but was not told the patient was infected until later that day.
They hide it, and then when our co-worker asking who patient is positive, then they said that this person is positive, and then they're crying because they give care already.
LVCC denies that it kept this information from staff at any time. Any resident that was tested positive was immediately put under isolation, and no one was allowed in contact with affected residents without being equipped with PPE. The care aide says with some staff too scared to come into work and others getting sick, there were significant staffing shortages and it impacted patient care. For example, a COVID-positive dementia patient allegedly wandering into another resident's room. LVCC admits there was a short time it faced staffing shortages and says residents with dementia always require a higher level of care. Despite these challenges, we took steps to handle these residents with extra care and caution, which was particularly enforced when professional replacement staff was brought in. Care aides are currently in a union organizing drive and at CTV's request help facilitate the interview with this worker.
Across our long-term care system, we have seen many concerns raised about staffing levels, about access to appropriate personal protective equipment for workers, about the kind of communication and leadership that's required at a site to protect against outbreaks.
The outbreak at Lynn Valley was declared over last month.
And CTV's Michelle Bernoro joins us now. And Michelle, some other provinces will hold public inquiries into how the pandemic was handled in long-term care facilities. Will that happen here?
Well, we asked Premier John Horgan about that today, and he says he doesn't believe an inquiry is needed in BC. He says the situation in long-term care in Quebec and Ontario, where the death toll is in the thousands from COVID-19, is much different from our province. Mi Jung?